Here's something I've learned after nearly 2 decades of teaching kids. Sometimes the best thing you can do is to not offer correction right away. I know it sounds kind of backwards, but let me explain why. Welcome back to the Morning Basket Music channel. I'm Leanne, a homeschool mom of 2 kids and a music educator. Right off the bat, I just want to say I am making this video for myself as much as anyone else out there because I know that I need to hear this message too. As a teacher, my correction needs to be very carefully considered. Let's see if anyone else out there can relate. I'm a number 2 on the Enneagram, and if you know anything about that, that's labeled as the helper personality. So when I offer correction to my own kids or to my students, it really is coming from a good place in my heart. I'm not just sitting up here on my high horse looking among them going, oh, look at me, I'm so educated, I'm so experienced, let me impart all of my wonderful knowledge and wisdom to you. It's not like that. It really is coming from a place of me wanting to help them become the best versions of themselves. I want to help them improve their skills. I want to help them develop and reach their full potential in whatever area they're learning. But the timing and the tone of my correction is really important. If you're in the homeschooling or education world, you may have heard of a famous man named Andrew Pudewa. He is the founder of a company called IEW, or the Institute of Excellence in Writing. He is by far one of my favorite teachers/speakers to listen to. But something you may not know about Andrew Pudewa is that before he started this huge curriculum company, he actually was trained as a music teacher, and he trained under Dr. Suzuki, as in the Suzuki method, which is pretty famous. So you could say that he learned from the best of the best. One of the famous anecdotes that I've heard him share several times is that before he would begin a lesson with a violin student, he would try to offer 10 compliments to the student before the actual music lesson began. So he would look for anything positive to say. I like the shoes you're wearing today. Or he would praise them for remembering to bring their sheet music. Anything he could do to compliment them and front load the lesson that way. And the reason was because in his head, he was thinking, I'm about to spend the next 30 minutes telling the student every single thing that they're doing wrong. And whenever I hear that story, I just laugh to myself because I can totally relate. Now, before we jump in to talk about some of the negative effects that constant correction can have on our students, I want to be careful and clarify one thing that I'm not saying. I'm not saying that we should only ever heap praise on our students and make their self-esteem the number one priority. Fixing mistakes is a big part of our job, and I do believe that students gain more self-esteem and confidence when they see their skills improving. But I think we have to be really careful about balancing praise and correction. And it's up to each one of us to determine what that looks like in our own unique teaching situation. Here's what I think can happen when we as teachers just immediately jump in every time and start correcting our students' mistakes. First, I think it robs them of the opportunity to figure out the problem themselves, or at least make an attempt to. Second, I think it can actually weaken their self-confidence and their ability to be problem solvers. And third, it could possibly diminish their love of learning or their love of that particular subject. So here's a story I'll share that happened in a small group keyboard class that I've been teaching this semester. It's only 4 students, and even though it's labeled as a beginner class, they didn't all show up with the same set of skills, right? A couple of them are a little bit more advanced in their music reading already, and then a couple are complete beginners. So in this particular class, we had been working on the skill of reading and playing 8th note rhythms. And in this class, we will kind of bounce back and forth between group performing or group playing, and then sometimes I'll call in individual students to play a particular part. So that's what had happened. I was asking a certain child to play an excerpt of a song that included 8th note rhythms. And he did not do it correctly. He played the correct pitches, but when it got to the rhythm aspect, he was playing every single note as just straight quarter notes. So there was no difference in the 8th notes that he was supposed to be playing. Well, during that time of the student playing, there was another student in the class sitting just a few seats away who kind of looked at me during the middle of this performance. And we just had this like nonverbal communication because he could hear the mistake being made. I clearly could hear the mistake being made. And he almost looked at me with this question in his eyes of like, are you going to stop him and correct this mistake? So I had to make a split-second decision of how am I going to address this student's mistake. And I will tell you, I did eventually come back around and correct his error, but not right there in the moment. So we will return to that story in just a moment. Just a quick pause here to say thank you so much for supporting the Morning Basket Music channel. Your like and subscribe really does mean so much to me. And if you're looking for great resources that make it easy for anyone to teach music, I would highly encourage you to check out our website, morningbasketmusic.com, where we offer simple unit studies that are engaging for young kids and super easy for anyone to teach. Next, I want to offer you a few different solutions for this problem. If you're like me and just your instinct every time is to jump in right away and offer that quick correction, we don't want to do that, but we want to make sure that our students are still learning. Well, then how can we handle it different instead? The first thing I would say is try and give yourself an internal clock. Literally in your brain, I want you to start counting a few seconds when you notice this urge to give a correction. So for example, if you've just asked the student or the class a question, I literally want you to pause and count 5 seconds in your head. And again, if you're like me, that seems like an enormous amount of time before jumping in and helping them arrive at the answer much faster. But really setting that internal clock gives our students time to actually formulate a thought, and it encourages us to pause and not just jump in so fast. Second, rather than just spelling out the answer for your student every single time, I want you to offer at least 2 different options that will help them arrive at the correct answer. So let's go back to that keyboard class story that I was telling you about a few minutes ago. How did I handle this student's mistake when he did not play the 8th note rhythms correctly? First of all, I didn't just call out the student directly in that moment because that probably would have led to some embarrassment. I know it would for me. Instead, I waited till he was finished playing, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but hopefully I had some positive comment, maybe about how he played the pitches correctly. But here are 2 different options that I offered to the entire group. I said something like, hey, let's jump back to measure 5 where we see those 8th notes being played in a row. And I'm going to show you guys 2 different examples. So maybe the first time I play it correctly, the way it was meant to sound, and the second time I played it incorrectly, like all straight quarter notes. And then I asked the group to tell me what they heard, which one do you think sounds correct, and why. And it actually was that same student that made the mistake who was able to identify, oh yeah, I was supposed to play those 8th notes faster. So it gave him time to consider it and hear those examples himself rather than me just spelling out the answer and giving it to him. A lot of times when this comes in the form of talking from the teacher and you just tell them the right way to do something, we all know it typically goes in one ear and out the other. I use this strategy very often, whether it's in one-on-one piano lessons or even in my own homeschool lessons with my kids, is I will take on the role of a student and I will do whatever the thing is 2 different ways. One is the right way, one is the wrong way, but I let them assume the role of teacher and tell me which one is correct or how I can fix something. And I really feel like by doing it that way, it's much less confrontational and it gives them a lot more responsibility. The last solution that I want to offer is to keep your overall goals in mind for that particular student and for that particular lesson. So every single week for my individual piano students, I write out a lesson plan for them that has a very specific goal. If we're meant to be working on something like playing different dynamics, and the student in that lesson is making an error in dynamics, then of course I'm going to correct it during that lesson time. But if it's a completely different skill and it's something that I'm thinking about more of long term, I'd like them to get there in this particular skill, then it doesn't always require me to correct every single thing about the way that they're playing because I have those long term goals in mind. I can think of another perfect example in my own homeschooling that's been happening this semester. So back in the fall, we started a new daily devotional book where we will split up Bible reading between both kids and myself. And if you have read any parts of the Bible, you certainly know there are some really difficult names and words different places that are hard to pronounce. So am I going to choose to use that time to stop them and correct them every single time they pronounce some word wrong? Of course not, because that's not the goal. I want to wrap up this topic by saying this. As I am raising and teaching my own kids at home, we do talk a lot about growth mindset, and part of that is having an openness to receiving feedback from other people who are teaching you or who are trying to help you with something. And that's really important, but ultimately we cannot control how our kids or how our students respond to our feedback. The best thing that we can do, in my opinion, is to keep our overall goals in mind, to carefully consider the personality of every child that we have the honor of teaching, and then to adjust accordingly both the timing and the tone of the correction that we're offering them. Let's show up for our students in a way that we are showing them we have confidence in their abilities to be problem solvers. If you have enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Also, I want to mention on my website, morningbasketmusic.com, besides the wonderful music resources that we have to offer there, there is also an option to book a coaching call one-on-one for 30 minutes with me. If there's any areas in your teaching of music or in your homeschooling where you feel like you could use a little bit of extra help and guidance from someone with experience, I would love to help you work through those issues. And I promise not to just jump in and correct you too quickly. All right, thank you so much for being here. I'll see you next time.